My name is Lindy Arsenal, and I'm your host for today's webinar. So today we have a special webinar, and we'll be hearing from one of our Institute Relations team members about how you, as a new or recent partner of Atlas Network, can get more involved with us and know more about the trainings, the grants, and the events that we offer. So my colleague, Erik Eppig, will be walking us through some of these different elements of being an Atlas Network partner, and then he's going to answer all of your questions. So as you think of questions throughout his presentation, make sure you go ahead and enter them into that question and answer box that you see at the bottom of your screen. So Erik, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Lindy, for the welcoming, and welcome everyone to the webinar. I'm glad that you're able to join us this morning, afternoon, or evening. And once again, welcome to the Atlas Network. We're excited to have you. It looks like we have a bit of a smaller group, so I want to make sure I leave plenty of time at the end for questions. But basically, we're going to do a deep dive into how to leverage our network and some of the resources that we offer to make full use of your partnership. So our agenda today is to go over a little bit of the Atlas Network Coach, Compete, Celebrate model, kind of a deep dive into our network as a whole, as well as how we can help. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to leave about 10 or 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. Obviously, many of you have seen this before. This is our mission statement at Atlas Network. And in sharing our mission, your partner organization is entitled to be a part of many of our opportunities, whether they be training, grants, awards, events, or consultations. But just to reiterate, Atlas Network increases global prosperity by strengthening a network of independent partner organizations that promote individual freedom and are committed to identifying and removing barriers to human flourishing. And I'm going to go into a little bit more of our Coach, Compete, Celebrate model, what that means, and how it could be useful for you and your team. So we have this three-tiered approach to our model that we call the Coach, Compete, Celebrate model. Under Coach, that is our Atlas Leadership Academy, a portfolio of online and in-person training opportunities based on skills that help you take your organization to the next level. Our Compete bucket includes our grants and awards portfolio. That's what the Institute Relations team, my team, manages at Atlas Network, and we'll do a bit of a deep dive later in the presentation. And our Celebrate model helps talk about the great work that we do with our regional Liberty Forums. Obviously, in today's day and age, it's been a little more challenging than normal, but I believe that the online events that we've been able to have this year have been very fruitful in the kind of connections and celebrations we've been able to foster. So how can we help at Atlas Network? Our job is sort of as an umbrella to be able to support the work that you and your team are doing in your respective environments. And so as you see this quote here on the right from John from South Sudan, he certainly sees the value in things like the Atlas Leadership Academy and our events. Just one of many examples of individuals and think tank organizations that have benefited from our programs in the past. So how can we help? Kind of mentioned about the training a little bit, and I'm sure Lindy can touch upon that a bit more later in the Q&A period. But the Atlas Leadership Academy is sort of low-hanging fruit, a great way to get started in the network. I know many of you have been involved with Atlas Leadership Academy, whether it be through the Think Tank Basics course or are currently in our Think Tank Navigator or Think Tank Impact courses, which are instructor-led online. Later this year, we're going to be launching some in-person opportunities, which I'll touch on in a bit here. But those should be very exciting for you and your organizations as you kind of look to take that next step in your partnership with us. On the grant side of things, we offer an array of grant funding opportunities ranging from project-specific grant lines to more institutional support grants. I'll touch upon these in greater detail later, but I know that that's something certainly on everyone's mind. And as we get closer to our August 15th deadline, I'm sure I'll get a lot of questions related to the grants. Our awards, we've just closed our awards portfolio for the year, our regional awards and our Templeton Freedom Award, but there's still plenty of time to apply for two opportunities. One is our Smith Student Award, and the other is our Lights, Camera, Liberty Film Festival. I'll certainly touch upon those a little bit later as well, but those could be of interest to you and your team. And then finally, as I mentioned before, the networking aspect. Oftentimes we really serve as a conduit for our partners to be able to connect with one another. I can tell you a great example recently where we've had partners in Spain, work with partners back in the States on tax policy. And that would have only come out of an Atlas Network event or an opportunity to network with one another. We often see through our trainings and events that, Facebook groups or WhatsApp groups formulate, and these long-standing relationships continue long after the event has concluded. So I hope that you all will consider tapping into those connections wherever possible. So I think Lindy's going to put a poll live. It's going to help us dictate where to spend most of our time in this discussion. But if you could just take a second to answer that poll, it'd be greatly appreciated. All right, so we're going to be moving on here. Thank you for participating, and I'm excited to see the results. It looks like we have quite a bit of interest in grants as expected, so I'm happy to do a bit of a deep dive there, as well as to answer any questions that I don't cover in detail. I mentioned the coach model. This, as I touched upon, includes all of the Atlas Leadership Academy, as well as some pro bono consulting solutions that we offer. So one of the big things that my team, along with Lindy's team, do is help our partners develop strong grant proposals, strong business plans, strong organizational budgets and strategic goals. And so, if you've been involved in the Think Tank Essentials course, this is a big, deliverable for that course. But we're also happy to work with you on giving feedback on proposals, helping you craft things that are competitive in terms of our grants process, and make sure that you're putting your best foot forward at all times in the network. We've already talked about the online trainings and webinars, and I'll touch on some specific examples here in a second. But we also provide regional training and mentorships, one of which is the Executive Accelerator. It's going to be happening here in about a month, as well as Leader Lab, which is going to be happening this October. And that's an opportunity that is open now, and I hope you all will consider applying for. So here's some upcoming Atlas Leadership Academy training. We have a webinar coming up in a couple of weeks here with Fee on how you can deploy data analytics more effectively within your organization. There's that Leader Lab that I mentioned. The deadline for that's August 20th if you're interested, and Lindy can touch upon that more in the questions section, but that's an in-person opportunity. It's several days of sort of in-depth leadership development training for young think tank leaders. And so we certainly hope that you'll consider joining us for that, as well as Lights, Camera, Liberty. That's just gone live. The application for that is not until December, but that's about a week of on-site training in Los Angeles, California with filmmaking experts. It's probably one of our more popular training programs, and there's a grant side of things to that. So more than happy to answer any questions in the Q&A about Lights, Camera, Liberty. And our Compete, this is sort of my team's bread and butter, if you will. We operate our grants and awards programs at Atlas Network. I mentioned the awards are kind of wrapping up, but we do still have those 2 opportunities out there, as well as competitions. As we move into next year, we're going to be launching things such as the Think Tank Shark Tank at our forums in all regions, as well as our Liberty Forum Freedom Dinner. So I hope you'll consider pitching us on a project that you're excited about. If you've ever seen the television show Shark Tank, it's a great way to go in front of some potential donors and pitch them on an exciting project and how you plan to implement it in a meaningful way. Just to touch upon a couple of grant opportunities here. One of our newer grant lines is the Global Voices for Open Trade. This is a cohort-based grant. It's very selective, but it's about changing the narrative on free and open trade. It will involve a year-long cohort involving many trade experts and Atlas Network partners working in this space. So that's certainly an opportunity to keep your eyes out for if you're working on issues of free trade. One of our more popular grant lines is JUMP, Joining Up to Minimize Poverty. This is a storytelling grant line focused on marketing and messaging, free market solutions to poverty alleviation. So if you're interested in that, I can certainly answer any questions. We get a lot of questions about poverty and freedom and how it differs from the JUMP portfolio. One of the main distinctions I would make is that the Poverty and Freedom Grant Line is geared towards policy-specific solutions to poverty alleviation efforts, whereas JUMP is much more about marketing and communications. So if you have a policy goal in mind, reforming a tax law, blocking a piece of legislation, poverty and freedom is the way to go. Otherwise, JUMP seems like a very strong fit for your project. I'd certainly love to answer any questions about projects you're thinking about, as well as how we can kind of make your proposal as competitive as possible. One of the other grant lines that my team manages is the Economic Freedom Audit. So if your country is ranked in the lower half of the Fraser Index's Economic Freedom of the World rankings, I would certainly strongly consider applying for that. This involves an audit event as well as a policy recommendation booklet. And I think it's one of our more exciting grant opportunities. Also highly competitive, but happy to work with you on a proposal. We have a number of other smaller grant lines, including our book translations, our startup fund, and our international student project grant. If you're looking for some institutional support, I'd highly recommend looking at the startup fund. I say it's smaller, but it's quite a bit of a range in terms of what our typical grant amounts are. Anything from $500 to $10,000 is a typical grant amount there. We're looking for strong business plans submitted as part of those proposals. So as I mentioned before, we'd be happy to work with you on developing those and making sure that your plan is a strong one and it's an organization that's looking to kind of take that next step in terms of its institutional growth. And then lastly, I think this is the area that I think everyone is most excited about, the Celebrate model, which encompasses our Regional Liberty Awards, our Liberty Forum Freedom Dinner, as well as our sort of awards programs and how we promote the work of our partners who have done extraordinary things throughout the course of the year. Liberty Forum Freedom Dinner this year, unfortunately, will be a bit of a hybrid event, which is the good and a bad thing, right? Nothing beats having the in-person connections, but we will have a much larger audience this year via the online forum, and I hope you all consider joining us. There's details about that on our website, and Lindy and I can certainly send through some links that would be relevant to you all. And I hope next year, as things kind of progress back to the new normal, to use a term that is being thrown around quite a bit, our regional Liberty Forums look to resume their in-person components in Asia, Latin America, Europe, and Africa. Our European dates are still being determined, but we have dates set for our Asia Liberty Forum and our Latin America Liberty Forum. So if you're interested in attending either of those, I hope you'll circle those dates on your calendar and wait for more instruction about speakers and travel logistics. But what else is new at Atlas Network? We've launched a number of exciting new initiatives during this COVID-19 period, and I hope you'll consider checking these out if you're bored or you're looking for a little extra motivation during some of these long days. I hope you'll look into opportunities like the COVID Partner Response Fund. This is an opportunity to launch a project geared at creating an economic recovery for your state or for your country in the post-COVID world. I hope you'll also look at our two new podcasts. We have Atlas Nexus and Hablemos Libertad. These are two new podcasts that we've launched where we've been able to bring on Atlas Network partners talking about a wide range of topics. I know some of the recent Atlas Network Nexus podcasts featured Greg Lukianoff of FIRE and Clark Neely of the Cato Institute talking about criminal justice reform. Very interesting stuff. I hope you'll consider giving it a listen. It's available on Spotify and our website. Think Tank Basics, I know a number of you have already engaged in that. What is new about it is that we now have courses in French, Spanish, and Portuguese. So if you have members of your team where English is not their first language, I certainly hope that you'll consider redirecting them to the Think Tank Basics translations. And then finally, Upward Globability is a new video project that my friend and colleague Vale Sloan recently launched, where he is traveling around the world in sort of an Anthony Bourdain style television show, meeting with people in our network, working on really incredible projects. And so he's already filmed episodes in South Africa with the Free Market Foundation and in Tennessee with the Beacon Center. So I'll hope you consider checking those out on YouTube. They're also available on our website. One of the common questions we get is, who is it that I email for different things? And I wanted to provide a bit of an overview. This is my team, Institute Relations team. My role on the team is sort of in onboarding and directing new and potential partners to resources that should be beneficial to you all. So that's why I'm here today. And I hope you'll always reach out if you have questions about navigating the partner process, navigating grants, trainings, anything and the like. Jack Shannon and Hunter Rausch sort of manage our grant portfolio, along with Honey Cribellari, who focuses predominantly on Central and Latin America. They're focused on working with grantees on their outputs and outcomes and giving them feedback on proposals. But to that end, feel free to send any of us a business plan or a draft grant proposal, and we're happy to work with you on it. I put their emails up there if you have any questions about anything related to your new partnership with us. Don't be a stranger. Feel free to reach out. We're always happy to work with you. So I finished a little bit under time. I did want to give everyone an opportunity to ask questions. I know I went through a lot of information just then, but I think the bulk of this webinar is being able to hear from you and where you're interested. And so without further ado, I'll leave it over to Lindy.
Yeah, Eric, so we have a lot of great questions. We're just going to jump right in here. First of all, what should I have prepared before I approach you guys with a business plan or, an idea for a project? What should I bring to the table in that?
Well, one of the things we look for in strong grant applicants is some kind of involvement in Atlas Leadership Academy. So if you haven't engaged, at least in the basics course, I'd urge you to do so before applying. In terms of the business plan, there's not, a sort of a cookie cutter template that we follow, but I'm happy to send example business plans that have been successful in the past if you need sort of a model to base it off of. But we really look for that business plan, and we look for a proposal that is strategic and it's timely and it's competitive for the grant line that you're applying to. So, if you have a policy specific project, we would hope that you would apply more towards the poverty and freedom grant line as opposed to something like a liberalism. And so those are some of the questions I'm happy to answer if you give me a sense of what kind of project you're working on. And my team can give you the feedback too on what it is that you're proposing in terms of outputs and outcomes. We have a really great guide on our website, and I'd urge you to take a look at that as well.
Definitely. So we have a lot of questions about the Think Tank Startup Grant. First of all, is that application open for people who are currently taking Think Tank Navigator, or do they have to finish Think Tank Navigator before they can apply for that?
That's a great question. You do not need to have completed Navigator, although it's strongly encouraged. I would urge you to submit an application anyway, because I know the Think Tank Navigator concludes a little bit after our August 15th deadline, and we're happy to work with you. Basically, we just like to see that you're engaging with the content. We're getting to know you a little bit more through your deliverables and coursework, and be able to kind of give you a sense of direction in terms of what we look for in strong grant applications. So I don't think that's a detriment at all. And if you have questions on a proposal or would you like feedback, please send me it. I'm happy to give you that.
Yeah, and then our next question on the startup grant is, what makes a competitive startup grant? If we're not really institutionalized, we don't really, have it all together, how can we make that grant application more competitive?
I think setting a strong strategic plan is one of the big determining factors for our committee. Being able to see where your organization is going to be in the short term, but also 5, 6, 7 years down the road. We want to make sure that we're investing in organizations built to last, not flashes in the pan. And so we want to make sure you're thinking about those long-term goals, what your long-term fundraising strategy is going to look like, what kind of think tank you're going to be. There's a lot of different types of think tanks out there, and I'm sure Lindy can give you some additional context there. But don't try to be a jack of all trades and a master of none. You want to be able to specialize, at least in the early stages, and kind of branch out from there. And so we want to make sure that you're thinking about those things, you're putting the pen to paper, and you have a strategic plan in mind.
Definitely. And I'll add to that, Eric, if you are thinking about applying for the Think Tank Startup Fund, make sure you look at Think Tank Navigator and take that with us, because we help you identify your think tank model, and we help you start to put together a good strategic plan and a good business plan in that course. So shameless plug for my team, but definitely consider taking Think Tank Navigator if you are looking to start a think tank or apply for that startup funding. So our next question, Eric, is can you talk a little bit more about how the jump line differs from the startup funding, and maybe give us an idea of what projects would fit into the jump and what projects would fit into poverty and freedom versus just general support?
Sure. I think the biggest differentiation is that our startup fund is typically for, institutional expenses. So, things that an organization might need to get off the ground. It's typically not pitched as a project-specific fund, although, we're open to those proposals as well. For JUMP, it is a very specific project. So projects geared at changing the narrative of free markets in alleviating poverty. So we've seen everything from apps being created to multimedia outreach campaigns via social media and the news, to books being produced. So, taking an innovative approach to kind of changing the prevailing narrative that, free markets don't work, capitalism creates poverty, and flipping it on its head and really correcting those misnomers and making sure that people understand that, with barriers being lifted, more and more people have opportunities for themselves to pull themselves out of situations that are very detrimental in terms of poverty, in terms of other challenges that groups face. And so I would say, back to the original question, we are really looking for specific projects for most of our grant lines. For the Think Tank Startup Fund, it's one of our few grant lines that's more institutional support. So we're not looking so much for a specific, project as much, but we're looking to be sort of a seed funder or an angel investor in your organization.
Yeah, and our last question, Eric, on the startup funding, do you have to be a partner of Atlas Network to apply for startup funding?
For startup funding, no, that's a great question. We have a couple of grant lines that are available to non-partner organizations, startup funding being one of them. International Student Project is another, as well as the translation grant line. I mentioned before that those are typically our smaller grants. So, these are going to be smaller dollar amount asks, and I'm happy to kind of go back and forth with you on what is a competitive amount to ask for. But I would say generally, those are smaller grant asks, and they're more targeted to specific initiatives. If you're a non-partner applying for startup support, we would want to see that you've engaged with us in some way. Through the Atlas Leadership Academy, you have that business plan in hand, and you have sort of a strategic direction for your organization.
Yeah. So Eric, I'm going to take us in a little bit of a different direction here. We have a couple of questions on ALA, and I'm going to field those, and feel free to jump in. We have a question for the Lights, Camera, Liberty training. If you apply, are all the expenses taken care of? And Lights, Camera, Liberty, we do have a cost to attend. There is a fee to attend the training, but we also do offer things like travel grants to help your organization get there. There's a lot of ways that we help you get to our in-person trainings. So most of our trainings, all of our online trainings are completely free, and some of our in-person trainings are free as well. For Lights, Camera, Liberty and for our Executive Accelerator program, we do charge a fee, but there are ways to apply for funding to help you get there and to help your organization kind of work through that. So hopefully that answers that question. If there are any other questions about Lights, Camera, Liberty, feel free to reach out to myself, or for the grants program, Hunter Rausch on the Institute Relations team. Eric, our next question is, can you talk a little bit more about the Poverty and Freedom grant line? Specifically, if advocacy for certified B Corps may be something that falls into that category. This B Corp certification focuses heavily on serving low-income populations without forcing companies to do so through policy. Would that be something that would fit in there?
I would say the general rule of thumb with strong poverty and freedom grant requests is that they need to have an ultimate policy reform goal in mind. So, so long as any project you pitch has some kind of policy reform goal in its stated outputs and outcomes, that would be a strong application in our eyes. Some examples of poverty and freedom projects that have been successful, we've had groups in India sort of reform, shopkeeper acts that prohibited women from working certain hours. It was a sort of a protectionist policy, and they were able to reverse that, allowing women to work however they pleased. We've had projects geared at, eliminating taxes and licensing fees in the states. So occupational licensing is certainly something that fits into the poverty and freedom grant line quite well. I would say, as long as you keep in mind that we're looking for a strong policy reform goal as sort of the champagne popping moment or big win of the project, and keep that in mind when pitching your proposal, I think it would be competitive in the eyes of our committee. But to your specific project, I'd have to look at a proposal and give you some feedback on that. But I'm happy to do so. If you send me an email and attach like a draft or a short blurb of what you're thinking, happy to work with you on that.
Awesome. So next question, is there a problem if somebody applies to 2 different grant lines at the same time, or should I just focus on one?
There's no problem. I would say that typically you'd want to avoid applying to like 6 or 7 different grant lines because your likelihood of being approved for that many grants at a given time is very low. But we typically do have partners apply for multiple grant lines if they're working on a number of projects. That being said, if your organization is brand new and you're just getting started, I would stick with smaller asks, things like the startup fund, things like the project other grant line. We didn't really talk about that, but it's sort of our catch-all bucket if your project doesn't fit into one of the grant lines that I outlined. Pitching us on a project that really meets your interest and not sort of employing the shotgun approach of pitching a bunch of projects that don't really fit within your strategic vision of your organization's development. I hope that helps.
Yeah, definitely. So as we're kind of coming to the end here, can you give us a little bit of an idea of what a competitive ask would be for, maybe the jump application or the startup application? And is it a good idea to kind of, go high in those asks, or should we really be trying to make that competitive and trying to keep it in a mid-range?
Well, it obviously depends on the project that you're proposing. Our jump portfolio grant asks are typically around the $20,000 US dollar mark, whereas our startup funds are typically between $1,000 and $10,000. So as long as you're kind of following that as sort of a general parameter, and in the application, you'll be asked for sort of a budget breakdown. So make sure that you're articulating and itemizing where you intend on spending the grant funds. Obviously, including a bit of overhead. That's a mistake a lot of applicants make, is that they don't include any overhead costs in a grant app, and then they're not able to sustain the effort once the grant has expired. And so, we're more than happy to support some overhead expenses. I think the general rule in ALA that they teach is about 10%. But I just want to make sure that, you're giving yourself some wiggle room to carry out these projects long term as well.
Yeah, definitely. So we're down to our last question, Eric, and you spoke about this a little bit with Think Tank Basics and the translations, but
Sure.
If there are people on my team that don't speak English very well, can we still apply for grants? How can we best communicate with Atlas Network? And, maybe you can speak a little bit to the different opportunities we have for non-English speakers.
Sure, that's a great question. I mentioned the basics, so not to reiterate, but I think that that's a really good starting opportunity for staff members who struggle with English, engaging with a number of courses in a variety of languages. Our grant proposals, you know, we do ask that those are submitted in English, just so it's easier for our committee to be able to read them and analyze them. But we do have 2 members of our team that are fluent in foreign languages, and they're happy to work with you on translations and kind of going back and forth on your proposals. So Hunter Rausch, as Lindy mentioned, is sort of our Spanish speaker on our team, and Honey Crevallari is our Portuguese speaker on our team. And so if you have any questions about, you know, does this make sense the way I've translated it, or I need help, you know, finding the English word for whatever I'm trying to propose, Hunter and Honey would be excellent resources for you. If your team speaks languages other than Spanish and Portuguese, we do have other staff members that can help as well. Just send that to me, send whatever requests you have to me, and I can redirect you if needed.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Eric. We've had some questions that we didn't have time to get to, but Eric's email is on the slide here. So make sure you reach out to him or any other members of his team if you had a question that we didn't have time to answer. This has been a great webinar. We've gotten a lot of really good engagement, and we are looking forward to engaging with you all more in the future. As Erik mentioned, we do have a special webinar coming up on August 27th, and that's with Fee on data analytics and how you can use those to really make your organization more impactful. So I'd encourage you to go to our website and see the details and register for that webinar. But until then, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Erik, for presenting. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, and welcome to the network.